Oh, I could make a speech, I suppose. Some rocks tube ready blather, pop fascism for the rubes and the tech bros. I could blame my tragic childhood, or the lust for blood and cruelty that never abates. Or revenge, of course. You believe revenge. But the truth, Thor? Absolute and unvarnished? I like it when the number goes up. That's all. Because that means I win. That means I'm better. And that's all there is. The Immortal Thor. Writer Al Ewing's great take on Marvel's premier Thunder God has been an excellent study on the character, and one especially focused on the role and power of storytelling. Today I want to have a close look at the story from issues 9 and 10 of that series, and the Roxxon Presents Thor special, and see how Ewing uses this to highlight the ability of stories to affect our perception of reality, and how that can be weaponised. The story follows Thor, charged by his mother Gaia to deal with those who would ravage the planet to spare it her full wrath. He begins by confronting Marvel's premier evil fossil fuel company, Roxxon. CEO Dario Agger happens to be a scary Minotaur man in league with Thor's old foes, the Enchantress and the Executioner, because comics. Agger is unmoved by Thor's warnings of Roxxon's hand in the catastrophe to come. He is actually planning on this as the next stage of capitalism, a corporate downsizing of the population to more easily control them while he continues to amass power and wealth. While Agger pontificates on his evil plan, Thor defends himself against the Executioner's axe, noting how his thoughts are sluggish and inarticulate. He notes that his own axe, Tormod, the signifier of his godly wisdom, isn't responding to his commands as it should. In previous issues, we saw the acquisition of the in-universe Marvel Comics brand by the Roxxon Corporation, and that plot point continues here. Agger shows Thor the first Roxxon published issue of Thor, and in a delightfully metatextual move, we get to read the comic with him. Roxxon Presents Thor is a work of insane genius, a very broad parody aimed at the forced ubiquity of a company's products, an in-universe piece of propaganda designed to make the reader really want to purchase more of the Roxxon brand's lifestyle enhancements. The values Thor and his allies represent are intensely pro-corporation, the day being saved by the timely use of all kinds of Roxxon branded merchandise, from VR specs, predictive AI, and tactical drone strikes. Thor's civilian identity of Chad Hammer works as an influencer in the field of AI-based hedge funds, drives a Thor truck, and wields the mighty hammer Mjolnir Premium. The antagonists are unwashed protesters, whose concerns about pollution and the environment are an affront to mankind's progress, and driven by the lies of a cowardly Loki. Their major weapons are the power of cancel culture and unruly shouting, truly a worse crime than any pollution. Like I said, this is not a subtle parody. After escaping the thrall of this enchanting comic book, Thor is confronted by a very real Chad Hammer, a magical being created by the Enchantress with the Chad Hammer persona grafted on. It does battle with Thor while his thoughts are filled with clichés and banter. This is caused by the subtle magic of the Enchantresses, combined with the influence of the comic. Thor is becoming closer to this new comic depiction the longer he is on Earth. While they fight, Agger is stabbed in the back by the Executioner using Thor's axe as part of a greater plot on the Enchantress's part. While she summons the police to begin a frame job, Thor's fight with his parody is being recorded by the crowd on their cell phones, and they say him effectively beat somebody to death with a hammer, recording it for all time. With the magic dispelled and his wits returning, Thor is able to wield his axe once more and calls it to him, for it to return with the blood of the Minotaur still fresh on its blade. So ends this tale of Thor and the subject of today's discussion. Ewing's Immortal Thor run is very heavily centred on the concept of story, the way that story has the power to influence us, to change us, and so using Thor and the Asgardians as a means to convey this message makes perfect sense. They are figures of myth, and so are existentially affected by the tales that are told of them. Ewing makes this explicit in the story preceding this one, where Thor asks Loki to retell an encounter from their youth. This is a retelling of Thor number 272 from 1978, itself an adaptation of a story from Norse myth, the characters changing in each telling to match the times and situation. And this happens in universe. Loki acknowledges that the tale will be different from Thor's memories, and he notes a change in some aspects of the tale as he tells it, one character replaced by another. Even the Minotaur sees this, his copy of Thor 272 changing in his hands as Loki tells his tale, the storytelling skald magic at work. Of course, we regular people are just as affected by stories too. Consider the different ways two news outlets will report on an event, and how this will inform different audiences in perceiving what happened. No, this isn't a segue into a sponsorship for Ground News, but something to keep in mind as we go on. In story, we see Thor framed as a murderer through the Enchantress's trickery. We as readers know the truth. Thor did not kill an actual person but a magical creation. But given how it doesn't lose its form at the moment of death, the crowd believes otherwise. Thor's axe is returned to him fresh from the back of the Minotaur, evidence enough for the police that he killed him. Famed comic writer and snake god worshipper Alan Moore makes this point in his writer's workshop for the BBC. The original bardic tradition of magic was one that was entirely based upon writing and literature, and interestingly, it was much more feared than just your common or garden witch or sorcerer. Now, if a magician puts a curse upon you, then your hens are probably going to lay a bit funny, your child might be born with a squint. These are things that are survivable, they're not that terrible. Whereas, when a bard puts a satire upon you, then that will destroy you in the eyes of your friends, in the eyes of your family, potentially in your own eyes. And if it's a good enough satire, if it is finely worded enough, then even 200 or 300 years after you're dead, people might still be laughing at you and your absurdity. Ewing uses the gods as a means to convey this to us, using very explicit changes to reflect the subtler influences that story can have on people. Thor is affected by the Enchantress's Skald magic over his comic series, causing him to lose his wits, acting recklessly and only able to think in cliché. He is presented to the public as a dullard, and in being perceived as such, he becomes one. Thor's intrusive thoughts are familiar to anyone who spent time discussing Marvel movies in recent years. All generic quips from the Whedon playbook, designed to prevent any situation from becoming too serious or sincere. That's going to leave a mark. Well, that just happened, the currently mimetic way of expressing disdain for this kind of dialogue. He's behind me, isn't he? Which was actually used in the movie Thor, Love and Thunder. This also applies to the Roxxon Presents Thor issue, in a more insidious fashion. The story seeks to actively influence the minds of its readers through the virtues and vices it presents. Thor spouts memes and exhorts the many fantastic products of Roxxon Corporation, all of which are integral to his success over the wicked Loki and his band of protesters. Said protesters are easily led fools, making 10-hour video essays and protesting seemingly for the sake of it. Every major plot point is driven by the use of a Roxxon item of some variety, Roxxon being a foundational brand in this world that provides all the creature comfort and major tech advances. Even Loki's band of unwashed hippies enjoy Roxxon's products, their frivolous objections to things like capitalism or global warming nothing more than lies spun by Loki. The story's climax hinges on Loki casting illusions, preventing Thor from truly perceiving what is real. But he's in luck, for his allies bring Roxxon's latest VR headsets, alternate reality goggles set to reverse. Trust the corporation to tell you what's true and what isn't. This brings us to the problem of Dario Agger, the Minotaur. As a business magnate, he has purchased Marvel Comics for this reason. He recognises the transformative power of storytelling, and so has monetized it. No longer art, but content. As he puts it, art. I never liked that word. I prefer content. It's so efficient. It's the unit of product to be sold, and the feeling you're selling with it. In such an anxious world, who doesn't want to be content? This pun where he asks if Thor is content is precisely Agger's objective. To create a product that he can sell in the millions to keep the recipients happy and numb. Content. Meanwhile, he grows fat off their earnings and plots to leave them on a ruined planet while he goes off to win somewhere else. And the story he chooses to tell is precisely that. An eternally recurring status quo, bereft of progressive potential, where Thor's relationship woes can never be truly resolved. The moral of the story provided even argues that humanity should not advance at any speed, lest Earth become too much like a paradise, the eternally sunny depiction of Gaia beams. Compare this version of her to the one that Thor confronted in the previous story, and you'll see a grave contrast. Tell people that Gaia's happy with our Earth as is, and they won't see Roxxon's endless pollution as a problem. Certainly, Agger is relying on this. His reaction to Thor's warning about environmental catastrophe shows he's actually banking on it, looking forward to using this to advance his power grabs. A walking example of the Frederick Jameson adage, it is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Hence why we have the Roxxon Thor, a cleaned up version of the Thunder God, unencumbered by years of continuity and with a new attitude and outlook that appeals to the masses. Something more easily sold. Jazz-hating philosopher Theodor Adorno described this as the culture industry, the idea of art co-opted to maximise sales and becoming formulaic and standardised in the process. This comparison is pointed out by Chad here. You see, I'm a clean, simple concept, and you're a mess. Look at all you have to be. A wise king, a kind brother, a noble hero. I just have to be strong. This could be read as an attack on the management of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Consider the overall tenor of the Marvel movies, leaning on quips and snarky dialogue. Characters routinely mock the superhero names, the conventions, as if to wink at the audience. Don't worry, we think this is stupid too. And this formula sells. People who traditionally never would have looked at a comic book eat the movies up with a spoon. Choosing Thor as a vehicle for this argument makes perfect sense. Thor Ragnarok, the third movie in the franchise, was highly regarded for shedding the drier tone of the first two movies for a more comedic take, and very highly praised. However, critical reaction to the following movie, Thor Love and Thunder, was mixed, generally citing an over-reliance on self-knowing comedy. A lack of sincerity towards the source material reduced Thor, in the eyes of the public, to be a figure of comedy. Film critic Mark Kermode's review hits on this, how the movie was trying so hard to be self-aware and postmodern that it fell flat.
And that's basically the tone of the whole movie. The kind of, knowing jokes about, hey, we're making a superhero movie, but we know we're doing it. So, we're making lots of jokes about it. Therefore, got characters dressed as gods, but they talk like they're in an episode of Friends because we're very, very postmodern.
Of course, critical reception is irrelevant as long as the numbers go up. Love and Thunder earned $750 million at the box office. Nothing to sneeze at. You may ask, how is it that Marvel allowed such a searing critique of theirs and their parent company's practices? Is Ewing trying to get himself fired? We even have an answer to that in story, albeit a very bleak one. During Roxxon Presents, Thor, Aja interrupts the story to speak directly to the reader. Technically Thor, but since we are also reading it, this can be interpreted as a statement to us. He's in on the joke, you see. He knows this story is ridiculous, is filled with meme culture and mocking references to the trappings of the superhero genre. But that's okay, we're all having fun together. As he puts it, the comic is self-parody, of course, but parody is an effective weapon in these times. A brand that takes itself seriously is mocked. A brand that mocks itself has free reign. A free pass into every consumer's head. Screenshot the cheesy advertisements. Turn them into memes. Make them viral. A disease that nests inside you. Make them harmless. We can laugh together, can't we? We're such good friends. How could you do without us? We are allowed to play, to be in on our own joke. Because in the end, the joke is on you. The joke is you. And we'll tell it until it eats you alive. This idea of a company producing products that attack both itself and the very economic system that enables it is hardly new. As writer Mark Fisher says in his essay Capitalist Realism, anti-capitalism is widely disseminated in capitalism. Time after time, the villain in Hollywood films will turn out to be the evil corporation. Far from undermining capitalist realism, this gestural anti-capitalism actually reinforces it. So long as we believe, in our hearts, that capitalism is bad, we are free to continue to participate in capitalist exchange. And this is why the Minotaur is laughing at us. The story of Roxxon Presents Thor contains so many knowing jabs at certain tech billionaires and internet culture we can pat ourselves on the back for how clever we are. Oh, we're not fooled by this silliness. We know every virtue this comic expresses is wrong, we say as we hand over the money to help perpetuate it. Aja purchased Marvel to control the narrative while making some money for himself, and it works. His first Thor comic works on a level of presenting Thor as a buffoon, changing his standing in the public eye in addition to actually affecting the god himself. It also works as advertising, overtly selling his products to the readers. And it lets him sell to people who hate him, because it lets them continue their performative anti-capitalism without actually doing anything to change things. In Immortal Thor 6 and 7, Thor asks Loki to tell him a story from their past, so he might better understand recent events. Loki warns him that the magic used to invoke this tale is dangerous, and may well lead to Thor's death if the story tells him that happens. In this role, they are the storyteller, and also the enemy. Thor agrees, saying that the storyteller must be a threat for the story to have weight. This is an interesting position, which informs much of what we've discussed. Loki's story forces Thor to confront harsh truths about himself, and forces him to relive past actions that give him great shame. Back to Alan Moore, the bard will actively work to destroy you with their satire. However, the Minotaur story offers no such things. It is just a flat advertisement. And here is why he, as storyteller, is the enemy. His story is exploitative, not something of value. It pacifies. It actively works to subdue so that the storyteller can profit. And it has no weight. It's a flat status quo that can be returned to again and again. Never challenging, never changing. Content. I don't think Ewing truly believes that by enjoying a product created by Disney, you directly contribute towards a post-apocalyptic landscape where a mutated mouseman rules over us with an iron fist. However, I read this story as Ewing's suggestion that we should be very wary of how the influencing power of storytelling can be used, in particular as a pacifying influence by corporations. We should keep an eye on who's telling us what story, and aim to question their intentions. So, let me know in the comments if you've been reading any Immortal Thor, or perhaps some of Ewing's other recent Marvel efforts. I know his Defenders Beyond miniseries touched on a few similar points and might warrant a reread. Start the conversation in the comments, and I'll see you again soon.